All right, let's dive into something a little different today. We're going to explore this really profound modern parable. It's basically a story about the end of all stories. It's this journey through humanity's whole search for meaning, and it's all written down in this one final, really mysterious book.
So, picture this. Our story is set in a place called the Hall Without Fire. It's super quiet, totally still, and right in the middle, on a stone table, there's this ledger. And this isn't just, some old book. Its pages are filled, but there's no ink. It only records things that have already finished happening. Kind of spooky, right?
So that really brings us to the main question here. What in the world could be written in a book like that? What secrets does it hold? And to find out, we've got three figures who've gathered around it. But get this, they're not there to start a new story. They're there to see if there are any stories left to be told at all.
Okay, so let's meet the cast of characters, our guides on this pretty wild philosophical trip. Each one represents a totally different way of looking at the world.
First up, we've got the soothsayer. He's described as the prophet of the gray truth. I love that. His voice isn't about big, soaring pronouncements. It's grounded. It's final. He's basically the voice of this is how it ends. Then there's the obsidian owl. Just imagine this thing. It's made of metal and moonlight. It's like the ultimate unfeeling recorder. Its eyes just reflect whatever is in front of it with zero judgment, zero hunger, zero anything. It's just pure, cold observation. And finally, we have the last thinker. He's kind of like us in this story. Even when everything else is winding down, he's still driven by that basic human need to understand. He's the very last person who still bothers to ask that simple question, why?
All right, so the soothsayer opens the ledger, and our journey begins. The very first pages, they tell humanity's first big story, that search for meaning in a world beyond our own.
Yeah, this whole era is called the Old Ascents, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It was a time defined by looking up. Meaning wasn't something you'd find down here on Earth. No way. It was something you had to reach for, something way beyond the physical world. Life itself was seen as a kind of trial, And just enduring all the tough stuff, that was seen as a holy act. It was all for some higher transcendent purpose. But then, you turn the page. After that whole era of looking up, the ledger shows this massive radical shift. Humanity's gaze completely flips. It turns away from the heavens and comes crashing right back down to Earth. And a whole new story about meaning kicks off.
And this is what they called the Great Inversion. Look at this. It's almost a perfect parody, right? They take all that old, sacred language about heaven and transcendence, and they just flip it. They repurpose it to celebrate the here and now. So instead of trying to escape gravity, the new mission is to affirm it. The goal isn't God anymore. Now it's all about the individual's will. But here's the catch. As the soothsayer points out, this new freedom, it came with a hidden command, a hidden rule. It wasn't enough to just exist anymore. Oh no, you had to constantly become more. You had to overcome your own limits, and then you had to keep affirming that struggle again and again and again. It was a totally new kind of work, and it was absolutely exhausting.
So, what happens next? What happens when that fire of becoming, of constantly striving, starts to burn out? Well, the consequences are right there on the next few pages of the ledger, and the pages start to get a little darker. We're entering a whole new age. And this is where the soothsayer really lays out his big idea. He basically says, look, this whole project of finding the meaning of the Earth, it was just a giant distraction. He argues it was never really about mastering the world. It was about running away from a simple, heavy truth, that the world just doesn't care. He calls it the great indifference. And that right there leads us into the age of the last men. This is an era where all the big, epic struggles are pretty much over. Grand ideas? Nope. They're replaced by small comforts. People still strive for things, sure, but it's manageable. It's quiet. And the last thinker has this great line. He says it's not really hell. It feels more like anesthesia. But wait, the ledger shows there's one person still trying, still climbing, Faust. But his story is different. His wager, his big bet, isn't about the classic damning your soul for power thing. It's about something way more final. He just wants to finish it. He wants to see this whole becoming project through to the absolute very end. And what does Faust realize? He sees that every single effort, every time he says yes to striving, it just creates another shadow. Every single act of overcoming just leads back to silence. So the ledger records this huge transformation. The active struggle of self-overcoming just gives way to the passive experience of self-undergoing. It's no longer about conquering, it's just about feeling how tired you are. And as Faust finally lets go, the obsidian owl makes its one cold, mechanical observation. Hope, it says, isn't some magical idea. It's a muscle. And just like any muscle, if you use it over and over and over, it eventually gives out. It fails. And that is the real end of the struggle. Okay, we've made it. We're at the very end of the ledger. All that striving, all those grand stories about meaning, they've all led to this one final page. Let's see what it says, where this whole long story finally lands. And wow, this last page just lays out the ledger's final brutal thesis. It's called the anti-gospel, and it totally reframes everything we just saw. It says becoming something. That wasn't some noble destiny, it was just a chore. And meaning, that wasn't a gift, it was like a fire that you constantly had to feed. The only thing that actually endured, the only thing that lasted, was silence, because it never asked for anything. Then the soothsayer begins his final sermon, and it turns everything we think we know on its head. He starts with, "Blessed are not the strong." And you think, wait, what? But his logic is, well, strength is a burden. It forces you to make choices, to keep acting, to keep up the effort. It's work. And he keeps going. Blessed are not the affirmers. The people who embrace their fate and yell yes to everything. They aren't the blessed ones either. Why? Because even affirming life, even saying yes, is a kind of work. It takes will. It takes energy. And then comes the final knockout blow of this new gospel. Blessed are the finished. The ones for whom the whole struggle is just over. They've arrived at the destination not because they won, but because they just stopped walking. The ultimate peace, it turns out, is found when you no longer have to become anything at all. So what does this do to our last thinker, the guy who's been asking why this whole time? He doesn't have some crazy transcendent vision. It's nothing like that. It's so much simpler, so much more human. He feels relief. He feels permission. Permission to finally stop striving, to stop asking, to just rest. And that's the final, really provocative idea we're left with. This great evening, this ultimate peace, it isn't an answer to the big question of meaning. It's just what happens when the question itself finally gets tired and goes to sleep. So think about that. What does it mean if the greatest relief we can find isn't in getting the answer, but in finally forgetting we ever asked the question?